Welcome to Movie Vault. In today's installment, 6 astronauts aboard the space station discover a large, single-celled organism that proves to be the first example of life beyond Earth, but as the crew begins to conduct research, they are quickly thrown into a battle for their and Earth's survival as the organism seems to be more intelligent than they expected in this sci-fi, horror, and thriller movie titled Life. Let's get into it. In the near future, the unmanned Pilgrim 7 space probe is struck by space debris while on its way back to Earth with soil samples from Mars. The 6-member crew of the International Space Station, by their names, Ekaterina Golovkina, Rory Adams, David Jordan, Miranda North, Sho Murakami, and Hugh Derry, are able to intercept the probe after sustaining considerable damage. The soil samples are studied by exobiologist Hugh Derry, as he is able to identify a single-cell specimen amongst the samples. Derry uses all of his expertise to revive the dormant cell, and they name the organism Calvin. Over the next several days, Calvin begins to grow exponentially as a multicellular organism on its glucose substrate. Derry notes that Calvin's cells operate as a brain, muscles, neurons, and photosensory cells all at the same time. He attempts to demonstrate Calvin's characteristics to the rest of the crew, only for it to tightly grab hold and crush Derry's hand till he passes out. Calvin then breaks out of its containment and devours the lab rat in the adjacent containment, growing in size. Rory enters the lab chamber to try to incinerate the alien, but it manages to enter his mouth and gradually kill him from the inside. Calvin then escapes through one of the air vents and into the rest of the ship. The rest of the crew lose all communication with Earth while sending out a distress call soon after. ISS Commander Ekaterina Golovkina goes out to find and fix the problem, only for Calvin to attack her and rupture her spacesuit's coolant. As her suit fills with coolant, Ekaterina blindly makes her way to the airlock. She and the crew realize that Calvin will re-enter the station if they let her in, so she chooses to stay outside and drowns in her spacesuit. Calvin attempts to re-enter the station through its maneuvering thrusters. The crew fires the thrusters to blast it away, but they drain so much fuel that it causes the ISS to enter a decaying orbit, where it will burn up in Earth's atmosphere. Pilot Sho Murakami suggests using the ISS's remaining fuel to get back into a safe orbit, even though it will allow Calvin to re-enter. The crew seals themselves in on one side of the station and prepares to vent the atmosphere from the other side in an attempt to render Calvin dormant. As the crew is in discussion about their current predicament, they notice Derry slipping out of consciousness, and they quickly do their best to resuscitate him, only to find Calvin feeding on Derry's crippled leg. Calvin begins to attack them, forcing Jordan and Miranda to flee to a different chamber in the ship while Murakami seals himself inside a sleeping pod as Calvin tries to break inside. Physician David Jordan and quarantine officer Miranda North use Derry's corpse as bait to lure Calvin away and trap him in another chamber. They discover a Soyuz spacecraft on its way in response to an earlier distress call from the ISS. As the Soyuz pushes the ISS out of Earth's orbit, Murakami tries to board the craft, believing it is a rescue effort, which then allows Calvin to gain access to the craft. The ensuing melee causes the Soyuz craft to crash into the ISS, killing Murakami and the Soyuz crew and causing the ISS to enter decay orbit once again. With the ship losing its atmosphere and the temperature dropping rapidly due to the damage sustained from the crash, the remaining survivors, Jordan and Miranda, speculate that Calvin is the only one capable of surviving re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, so they devise a plan to lure Calvin into one of the ISS 2 escape pods. Once inside, Jordan will manually pilot Calvin's pod into deep space, isolating it and allowing Miranda to return to Earth in the other pod. Their plan works, apparently. However, Miranda's pod is eventually hit by debris, while Jordan is seen struggling with Calvin over control of the pod. As Miranda's pod flies in one direction, she records a black box message to warn Earth of Calvin's threat in the event she doesn't survive. Eventually, one of these 2 pods lands on the sea and is found by Vietnamese fishermen, while the other pod hurtles through space away from Earth. What the Vietnamese fishermen find turns out to be Jordan's pod and not Miranda's. The Vietnamese fishermen then open Jordan's pod despite his warnings, as other boats are shown arriving at the scene while Miranda's pod is shown flying uncontrollably into deep space while she screams. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave a like. Write down in the comments what movie you would like us to recap next.